Hi, I'm Sarah, actor, dancer, jokester, and I grew up in a cult.
I bought that as like a joke, and then it actually ended up working really well for us.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having you on this podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you. So currently, you're one of the lead cast members in the Edgar Allan Poe Speakeasy that's touring all over the U.S. Apparently, like in Tampa. Where did you say? Atlanta. You were in Tennessee, and then if you just want to kind of give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and then we can just jump right into the questions and
Sure.
Gotcha.
Well, I am Sarah Fye, actor, dancer, jokester, pole dancer, dance teacher, yoga instructor, astrologer, Jill of many trades.
Yes.
I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee, where I am from, where I grew up. I lived in New York City for a long time, where I worked as a performer and learned, a lot about myself in that 7-year period that I was there. And I go back often to work and to play. And I don't know what else you want me to tell you about myself, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, so the other day we were at an old haunted mansion and we were doing the Edgar Allan Poe Speakeasy show.
Right.
And you just very casually mentioned, having no idea that I had this podcast, you very casually mentioned that you grew up in a cult.
Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah, actor, dancer, jokester, and I grew up in a cult.
Yes.
No, so I like to say it was like a pseudo cult. So when people hear the word cult, obviously they think of like, Heaven's Gate or like,
People's
drinking
Temple.
poison or right. So it wasn't that intense, but the definition of a cult truly is that like there's like one leader who sort of controls how people live in a way and like makes rules and guidelines and you have to sort of like pay money in order to be an upstanding member. And so all of those things are true about the church or the religion or the cult that I grew up in. But there wasn't any like snake handling or anything like that. I think overall, the majority of the people that were involved had good intentions, like many cult members do.
That's how it starts. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then it just kind of goes from there. But so I grew up in the Worldwide Church of God. It was founded in 1933 by this man who was like in advertising. His name was Herbert W. Armstrong. And he obviously knew how to lure people in because he worked in advertising. But essentially he thought that like the way in which people should live would be that they go to church on Saturdays, they live by the Old Testament of the Bible. So we celebrated the High Holy Days, and that people should follow dietary restrictions, that people should not be able to marry after divorce, and that people should only sort of date or marry other people who were a part of this religion, cult, whatever you want to call it. So he started the church in the 30s. We called it the church. That was just like the slang term that we used for it.
It's kind of like the umbrella term.
Right, the umbrella. Yeah, we're in the church and we're a part of the church, and those people are also in the church. But it was also there was this idea that a lot of people in these religious situations have, that we were the chosen people, that because we had been called to, attend this church, and that we had made this commitment that we were the chosen ones, that we would very similar to, to Judaism. But so anyway, I feel like I got off track a little bit. So this man started this church in the 30s, and he lived, I think, originally in Oregon, and then moved to Pasadena, California, and created this sort of whole, it was actually like, to think about it now, it's like pretty impressive that he created this whole, like, he used to have this like radio or TV program called The Plain Truth, which is where he would go on and just sort of present these ideas about what it meant to be like one of the chosen people, and sort of breaking down these specific stipulations that were from the Old Testament of the Bible, and making sense of like why people should still abide by these like laws and rules that were, inspired by God.
And could anybody listen to this, or was it specifically in that area?
So that was one of the things that was interesting. He also had a magazine called The Plain Truth, that was free. So you could find it on, like, how you go to like a restaurant, they have like the magazine shelf where you can just like take a newspaper.
Yeah.
So he had this magazine called The Plain Truth. He had free, it was like public access, I guess, programming where he would go on and talk every Saturday or whatever day it was. And although all of that content was free to the public, in order to be able to, it's actually really smart, it's like this whole like idea of like, advertising to people and like marketing to people. So he, put out this content for people to see, and then people would become interested in it. And then they would go, ooh, I wonder, I want to learn a little bit more. And it's like the free personality test. Scientology, like, ooh, like, I want to learn a little bit more about this. And then, so in order to become a member of the church, you had to take these like several weeks of study and classes to sort of learn what it was that they taught, to sort of digest and understand what you're getting yourself into, and to make the commitment.
Wow.
Yeah. So it wasn't just like, oh, you're interested, well, why don't you come again? And then we can like see how it goes. It's like, no, if you're going to commit to this, like you need to learn exactly what it is that we believe in.
Interesting.
And take these like courses that would then allow you to pay the fee. To be a church member.
It's almost like a sorority. It's like, we decided you're in, and then we charge you money to be.
And very much like converting to Judaism too. Like,
I was just about to say that. Yeah. When
you convert, you have to take several classes and study the Torah. The Torah, mm-hmm. And sort of learn the whole culture behind it. But so it was interesting that he put out this like free content, the magazines, the radio or the TV programming, and then that was sort of the way to lure people in. And then once you became a member of the church, we had what we called first, second, and third tithes, which was where you would dedicate essentially something like 30% of your income to the church.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot. To think about my parents like donating that much money, and it wasn't like, oh, we like pass the tray around, and if you can, then please donate. It was like, no, you got to pay the fee, and we pass the tray around at church. Like, you have to pay the tithes.
Wow.
And also, if you would like to donate more, please put money in the hat or whatever.
And I like that there's kind of this combination of Christianity and Judaism, because I feel like one of the biggest hallmarks of Christianity is proselytizing and bringing people in. And one of the hallmarks I feel like of Judaism is that exclusivity, where you're either born into it or you convert to it, and the process is very difficult. And this guy seems to have kind of merged the two, where he's like, I want more people to join, but I only want the people who are willing to take this seriously, to take this test. And then you've got the whole Tom Cruise thing going on where everybody pays money to
Right,
be involved.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so it was really like that. Like, I think that someone referred to it as, like British Israelism. So, so
Wow.
it really was this like Anglo-Saxon meets like Judaism, like just this weird combination. But we went to church so because we lived by the Old Testament, we went to church on Saturday mornings instead of Sundays. And so it was like Sabbatarianism as well. Like it was just like this combination of a bunch of different pieces of different types of religion, all sort of like combined. But similarly to being like an Orthodox Jew, we on Friday nights from sundown until Saturday night sundown, we would do nothing but rest and study the Bible. So every Friday night, we would have dinner. And then after dinner, my dad would have us sit down in the living room and we would read some passages of the Bible and he would talk about what they meant with us.
So very similar to like a devotional.
Right. Yeah. And so that would be our Friday night every week. We would get up early on Saturday. We would go to like a 2.5 hours church service.
Wow.
We would generally have like a potluck after where people would bring food and we'd all share. And so there was this like sense of community within our church. And then on Saturday night, so one of the things that like I think about when I remember growing up in the Worldwide Church of God was that on Saturday nights, we would like have so much fun. Like my parents would have people over, they'd have parties, they'd be drinking, or we'd all go out to dinner, like 50 people, just like drinking pitchers of margaritas and hanging out and having a good time. So while it was like, oh, this weird, strict thing, it was like Saturdays after church, after the sun went down or started to set, that was a time where we all got together with our like community of people and we just like cut up. But
so interesting. It's like all the parts of different religions mixed together, and then also like the best part of like secular life also in there.
Right.
Like allowances in there. Very interesting. Now, you weren't born into it, were you? Your parents converted.
No, I wasn't. So my parents, after they got married, moved from Chattanooga to Nashville. And they were both here sort of looking for a way to make friends or find community or be, to feel some sort of sense of, because their families both lived, a few hours away. They didn't really know anyone here. And it just so happened that like they both sort of came across the magazine, The Plain Truth, at the same time, but they weren't like, oh, let's look at this together. It was like my mom had brought it home and was like privately reading it without my dad knowing. And like my dad had brought it home and then she sort of presented it to him. And he was like, well, that's weird because look, I got one too.
Yeah.
You're reading it. So from there, they sort of decided to go and have a meeting with the deacons of the church. So I talked a little bit about how Herbert Armstrong had moved to Pasadena and created this whole sort of, this congregation there, but it was literally, it became a worldwide organization because we had churches all over the world. There were congregations in South Africa, in England, in Germany, like from Australia, all over. And so and like for each congregation, there were, the deacons, like the people who were higher up in the church. And I forgot where I was going with that, but we were talking about.
So when your parents first kind of like discovered
it.
Right.
So they went to like the local congregation and had a meeting with like the deacons and the pastor and decided that it was something that they wanted to become a part of. I think that I was a baby when they joined. So I grew up in the church, but my parents were not in. It wasn't like they had grown up in it.
Right.
And then it was something that like came about when I was too young to remember. My whole childhood up until the time I was in the 5th grade, we were a part of this
Yeah.
religion. So,
And one thing
yeah.
I've noticed is that whenever you talk about it, you don't talk about it with the same, like a lot of times when I talk to people about their religious background, they kind of have like an almost like an anger, I guess, for like,
Mhm.
oh, like all this shitty stuff happened. Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience? Why did they leave?
So for me, I'll sort of break it down. For me, I never identified with it. I was like, why can't we? Because okay, so one of the other things was we didn't celebrate any pagan holidays. So I didn't celebrate Christmas, Easter, birthdays, anything,
Interesting.
Valentine's Day, Halloween, anything like that.
Yeah.
To the point where it was so strict that like I remember being in kindergarten and it was Valentine's Day and we got a coloring sheet that had a mouse with a big heart on it. And the teacher was like, "Oh, Sarah, you're not allowed to color this sheet. I'll give you a different one," because it was like a Valentine's Day coloring sheet
Yeah.
and I wasn't allowed. I wasn't allowed to have trolls or watch the Smurfs or, you know, eat unclean meat. There's just so many
Oh,
little stipulations that
yeah.
for me felt oppressive
Yeah.
as even as a child. I was like, I don't understand why I can't, like, why can't we have a Christmas tree? That sounds fun.
Yeah.
No, so but I've always kind of been like a rebel a little bit and a little
Yeah.
bit
You,
like,
no way. No way. Not the pole dancer.
right, exactly. Yeah. So, but my brother is very much like he's extremely like he wants to understand everything and why it fits into a box. And my brother was very interested in being morally sound and doing the right thing as a kid, whatever that meant, even if it was somebody else telling him, like, this is the thing that you need to do.
Yeah.
My brother growing up would like sit up tall and listen during Bible study and like ask important questions about, you know, what it was that we sort of like thought believed in. And I wasn't that way. So I didn't really care, or I more so just wanted to be able to do normal social things as a kid, like have a birthday party or, you know. My parents though, I think that overall, to answer your question, it was a good experience in the sense that we did feel very much connected with the people that were in
Yeah.
the church. And my very best friend in the whole world, I call her my sister. I've known her since I can remember being alive. Her parents had grown up in the church, and her parents and my parents became very close. They live 2 minutes down the street. She's still my best friend in the whole world. We have matching tattoos. She lives down the street from me now. I'm
That's
the
awesome.
godmother of her parent or her children.
That's
So
awesome.
in that way, we had this sense of like support and love within our community. But it did feel oppressive. It did feel like, oh, well, you mean to tell me that when I get old enough to like a boy, he has to also believe in this stuff? And there are only so many people that are involved in
Right.
this. You know, I think at the height there were maybe like it was a worldwide thing, but maybe there were like 150,000 members of this church, and I got to pick one out of this crowd of people. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And he can't be divorced before,
And
so
he
that
can't be
narrows it down
divorced. So
even.
that
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Cuts it in
So
half.
get those, yeah. But to answer your question, the way that we sort of got out is that I think this might still be true. I'm not 100% sure, but at the time, so what happened was, and I know that you and I had talked a little bit about like revelations.
Yes. Yes.
Even though it was like we lived by the Old Testament of the Bible, but we like sort of like delved into the New Testament a bit, but then Revelations was like the thing that we talked about, studied about, like
Huh.
the end of time, because there was
Yeah.
this obsession with Jesus coming back to earth, like Jesus returning to the earth and like bringing back the dead or casting out the darkness or all of that stuff, you know, all of that stuff that they talk about in Revelations. And so this man, from what I understand, sort of thought that whole thing was going to happen. Herbert Armstrong thought that whole thing was going to happen before he passed away. And then he ended up dying, and someone else, his name was Joseph Tkach, who's like a higher up in the church, ended up taking over, and he passed away in the 90s. But during the time in which Tkach was like the highest up, the church sort of began to shift from sort of what we talked about it being, and they sort of started to like loosen the law of the land a little bit more. So from what I understand, it was very strict under Armstrong, and then they sort of kind of like strict to the point where like women could only wear long dresses and not wear makeup. And then it sort of was like, oh, well, we're gonna, right, yeah. So we're gonna kind of like ease up on that, and like, oh, birthday parties are okay, like, but just make sure it's not like too big of a thing. I like kind of ease up on that.
Yeah.
And then this man ended up dying, and his son took over, and his son, I guess, had like a moment where he was like, this is wrong. I'm taking people's money. I'm controlling them. This doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So he basically called everyone out to headquarters.
I think in California?
In Pasadena. Yeah. There was like so they had like a whole university set up where people could go and study like it was seminary, but like just for an hour specific church. And the school was in Pasadena, and that's where like the big building where headquarters was. So he calls the deacons out to Pasadena, and they all go. And he's essentially like, listen, I mean, and a lot of these people had grown up in this church. They'd never known anything else.
Right.
Like, listen, we're not going to do this anymore. Like, I can't in good faith continue to take your money, and you're going to move towards just being a non-denominational Christian church.
Wow.
Yeah. And from what I understand, it's one of the only churches, if not the only in history, to sort of admit that they were scamming people.
Yeah. To be like, hey, listen.
Right, listen. So we know we've been taking your money for like 50 years.
We need to talk.
Right. So I remember the day that it happened. I remember pretty clearly everything about it. We were at our church. I was in the 5th grade. You know, I was just sort of coming into understanding what it was that we truly believed and why, and never really accepted it, but was at least like, okay, I get it. Like, I hear you. Check. Like, because before that, you're a kid, you're like, okay, Jesus loves me, this I know. Great.
Right.
Like
John 3:16.
Right. Yeah. Like, cool. Said my Bible verses. What's for lunch? But we were sitting there, and I remember the pastor came in, and he started to sort of tell the people in our church, like, hey, so I've been out in Pasadena, more eloquently than this, not like, yo, what's up?
So I was out in Pasadena, smoking a J,
we're smoking a Cali,
hanging with the fam.
He essentially is like, everything that we've been sort of studying, believing in, thinking about doing is wrong, or we're not. Essentially, like, broke it down for everyone. It was like, we're not doing this anymore. Like, the jig is up. You could stay if you want. We'll still have services, but it'll be non-denominational Christian. We're not going to do the Holy Day thing anymore. And I think for a while we were still doing like Holy Day celebrations, but it was also like, but if you also want to have a Christmas tree and keep Christmas, it was like Jews for Jesus.
Did he seem
he seemed
or like shook,
but I remember people standing up and leaving and being like, what? This is a travesty. Oh my, are you kidding? what in the world? We're leaving. And so then what happened was a bunch of people broke off essentially and were like, oh no, we're still going to do that. Like we're still going to be Worldwide Church of God, but we're going to start our own. We're going to start our own thing. And then so it was like the people who wanted to keep going in that direction and had full faith in the church went that way. And the people who didn't were like, cool, guess we're Christian now.
Like, so I can eat pork is what you're saying.
No, right. So, yeah, so we could get some shrimp, peel and eat shrimp after this, right? Yeah. So,
wow, I literally can't even believe what that, because I was just Baptist. I just grew up Baptist, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to have the pastor stand up and be like, hey, so everything we've done up until now, you don't have to do it. Yeah, like not only that, but like we literally aren't even supposed to believe in it anymore. I'd be like,
right. Yeah, exactly.
And I was like you, I wasn't like, I was into it, but I didn't care. Like I literally, I didn't have a single Awana's badge on my little vest. I didn't do the work. Like it didn't, like whatever. But wow,
exactly.
That's
so so it was like something out of a movie, because one of the other things was, so we celebrated the High Holy Days, but like we had, because it was this like worldwide organization and we had sites and members all over the world, one of the things that we would do during the Feast of Tabernacles was every year we would have, I'm so sorry, my dogs are fighting.
I can't hear anything. I hear my dog snoring.
Yeah, they're like growling at each other and they're play fighting. But so we would have these church sites set up for the week of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is somewhere between like the end of September, early October. And every year for a whole week, I would be excused from school and we would take this trip to wherever we were going that year to meet at one of these church sites with other members from other places around the world. And we would go to church every day in like a big auditorium. So like say one of the sites was like, oh, this year you could go to Nashville. So they would have like 7 or 10 or 15 different places that you could choose to go to.
Okay, so you didn't have to go on like a international trip.
No, well, you could if you wanted. We never did because my family wasn't like, we were working class. But my friend Sarah that I was telling you about, they went to Scotland a couple of times, I believe.
Wow.
Or England one year, Scotland another year. But say like, oh, it's like in Nashville this year, we've got like rooms blocked off at a discount at these 7 hotels. You can, stay there. Other people from the church will also be staying there. And then every day we would have a church service at a place like the municipal auditorium, like not the Titan Stadium, but like, and not like
what's it called? Where it's like military, it's like a military.
Oh, like the War Memorial.
Yeah, something like that.
So
I feel like every town has one.
Yeah. So actually like the War Memorial Auditorium is where we used to go to church here in Nashville. That was like where we had service. So anytime I go to a concert there, anything, I'm like, this is so weird. What's happening?
This feels wrong in a way.
Yeah, right. But we would meet up at, we would go away for a week. Like one year we went to Orlando. And so we would go to church service in the morning for an hour. And then we would go do whatever else we wanted. In that case, we went to Disney World for a week. And we would have this like big celebration, big vacation. Other people from our church would be there. So we were just like meeting people or seeing people again that we hadn't seen in a long time that lived in other cities. And that would be really fun. But
sounds like
it was like a lot of things like that where it's like a big ordeal. Like people put so much like time, effort, and energy into going on a huge trip with their family every year, and then to have someone come in and be like, well, actually that was dumb because we're not doing it anymore. It's like, people were pretty upset about it. But yeah, so that was sort of the demise. My parents continued to go to the church, but not be a part. Like when the other people broke off and did like Worldwide Church of God, my parents were just like, no, we're just going to stay here, non-denominational. The weirdest part for me was really though, when I was younger, was like sort of obsessed with like this idea of Christmas being this like magical time and this like holiday that's just like, oh, wonderful things happen on Christmas because it's the season of love. And it's like Jesus was like like born on this day and people just do sweet things for each other and it's snowing and you're drinking hot cocoa and like
And you
making
stomp people to death at Walmart on Black
right.
Friday.
Yeah. And then I got to celebrate it and I was like, this holiday is not that great. Like I'm pretty stressed out because I don't know what to get my
Wait,
mom.
I have to buy stuff for people too. That was the season of giving. Give to me.
Right. I never had that like magical Christmas time. I didn't grow up believing in Santa Claus or anything like that. Because, you know, I was in the church. So
Yeah.
it was kind of weird to suddenly be like, I guess we're doing Easter this year. What do I even do?
You guys want to, I don't know, paint eggs? Light them in the yard? Isn't that how that works? I don't know.
Right.
That's funny. Now, when you look back on your years in the church, do you find that you have anything that you still kind of carry with you from back then, like traits or habits or beliefs? Or do you find that you have the complete antithesis of what you believed then that maybe subconsciously is kind of because you want to split from the church?
Well, I will tell you, I'm not religious, but I am an incredibly spiritual person who really believes. So I practice yoga in the true sense, not in like the core power yoga sense where it's like, let's work out and sweat, but like the 8 limbs of yoga. I have been studying for many years now. I'm a certified yoga instructor, but I read all kinds of yoga books. And for me, I think that like the biggest takeaway with being a yogi in the truest sense that I know how to be one, and you know, I'm always working towards being a better one, is that the word yoga literally means oneness. So it's encompassing, it's radical inclusivity of all and everything. So when I say I'm not religious, what I mean is like I don't want to turn my back on all religious things. I don't want to say that like, oh, it totally turned me off and I'm not into
You're
it anymore.
not anti-religion.
No,
You're
I
like
just think I
a-religion.
think that everything has its place, and I want to be inclusive of all ideas and listen to everything that is given to me and take what works for me in my life, to create more peace and more love, and use that. And then if it doesn't work for me or I don't find it beneficial, to just let it go.
Yeah.
Religion to me just feels too controlling and too stifling. So I don't know. My yoga teacher always says like, she's like, I believe in it all. I believe in a good meditation and a glass of whiskey, cigarette, and a game of pool, you know, like, so just, I don't feel like it really turned me away from religion because I was never that into it to begin with.
Right.
But it definitely made me more skeptical than I already was, like just wanting to ask the questions, and not just blindly follow anything because somebody said like, this is the way.
Right. And did you find, or do you remember your parents like struggling at all in that transition, or were they pretty smoothly able to just kind of land back on their feet and decide what they wanted to do after the deconstruction of the church?
Yeah, I think that it was tough to lose so many people that were close to them as friends. Like it was tough to not have that sense of community anymore, because so many people left, and when they made the decision not to follow, a lot of their friends that they had been spending so much of their time and their weekends and their free time with, they weren't around anymore.
Yeah.
But as far as all of the other stuff, as far as like, oh, we're not gonna go to church on Saturday mornings. I mean, that wasn't that big of an adjustment, even though we were in the church for what, 9 or 10 years.
Yeah.
It still wasn't that big of an adjustment because in their, 30 years before that, they didn't go to church on Saturdays. They didn't live by the Old Testament. So it was sort of just like this rewind back to what it meant to be back with family on holidays and things like that. Yeah. But I think there definitely was that like sense of community that they were missing, even still, they still keep up with, my mom plays cards every Friday or every other Friday with 3 women that were in the church with us.
Oh, that's
she's
cool.
Still really good friends with, and they're not in it anymore, but they're all still close. And so some of those connections they were able to keep, but I know that it was like a big family, and then the family just sort of split up. The band split up.
And so they probably have like nothing but good things to say about it, about the church. Like they don't seem to, or do they have negative feelings towards it?
I think it was mostly good. I think that they like, obviously when you're paying out that much money, it's like,
where did it all go too? It's like, do we get return on our investment? Like, where did that go?
Exactly. So no, nobody got their money back. It wasn't like, oh, and by the way, we're selling this huge office that we have in Pasadena in the school, and you guys get a chunk of change.
I like that he's like, man, I hate taking your money. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to give you a refund.
Right.
But I'm also not going to do this anymore.
You're not getting your money back. But I just won't take anymore. So I think, they think about that, and it's like, my dad had a well-paying job for the 90s, and my mom didn't work. That was one of the other things. They really encouraged women to like stay home and cook homemade food and have, dinner on the table by the time the husband came home, and to be like the caretaker of the children. It was very like old school in that way too, like very Handmaid's Tale. And I, if that had been me and I had been my mom, I would not have been able, that's not my calling or my path.
Right.
I know that there are probably lots of women who were involved who went down that road and then maybe regretted it. My mom is very much a caretaker who loves to cook for people and loved nothing more than to be a mom. So I feel like that wasn't that big of an adjustment for her. But I think they think about, like, my dad had a pretty well-paying job, and like, it's like, well, what if we had just saved that 30%? Like, what could we have done? We could have, instead. But and again, money comes and goes. So
and also imagine being one of those women and they're like, hey, I know we told you to not pursue higher education and to stay home. Turns out could have done that.
Could have done that.
You would have still gone to heaven. It would have been fine.
Remember when you wanted that career and we told you couldn't have it?
That would have been rough. Is there ever a time where your parents do or say anything where you're like, there it is, like there's the church coming through a little bit?
Well, my mom, they were very much into like anointing. So there was this like there was all kinds of talks of, and my mom was very into like my mom's kind of witchy anyway. Like, she has prolific dreams. Like, she has dreams that come that I could get into the astrology of why she's that way, her astrology, but we're not going to take it there. That's a different podcast. But she I'm sorry, I got off topic. What was the question?
We were talking about how, like, do you ever see like signs or
right. So she's always been, and especially because they were like, make homemade food and like things all natural, and she's always kind of been that way anyway, but she like sort of became like obsessed with like herbal remedies and
a homeopath
and things like a homeopath and all that stuff. But she would do this thing before we left every day where she would lay hands on us and anoint us, and she would like put a little oil on our head and like pray over us, and sort of like a manifestation prayer, like a thanking God for something as if it had already happened. Like, thank you for blessing Sarah. Thank you for her protection. Thank you for her safe cheer practice, like whatever. And she still kind of does that. Like, she will text me sometimes and just say like she'll say her prayer to me in a text message as if the thing that she wants or that I want is already unfolding. So kind of those things. Other than that, like, not really. I mean, my parents too, it's funny to think about because they got so involved in this church. but like they're not like these kinds of people who are very like strict or stern. Like they're very free. My parents are very liberal. They're very
Yeah.
like non-conforming to
That's so
societal
interesting.
standards. And
Yeah.
it's like, how did
Right.
that personality type end up
Right.
in for 10 years in this? But
That's
I
interesting.
really do think that it was just this longing to belong, to
Yeah.
feel like I want to come back to these people who like me and who know me,
Yeah.
and we're gonna like have potluck together, and then in
Yeah.
October we'll all go on a big trip, or we'll spend Saturday nights like we'll have people over for dinner, or they'll have us over and we'll drink, or we'll go out after and we'll party and have fun, and then we'll all come together for this
Yeah.
like common thread, this like thing that we're sort of all moving through with each
Yeah.
other.
And I feel
um
like I feel like goes through that phase. I feel like we all have the photos of us where we were the Abercrombie girl or the
oh, for
Hot Topic
sure.
girl or whatever, because like
Mhm.
that's who wanted us, that's who accepted us, that's who
Mhm.
invited us to eat lunch with them. And we all look back on that and we're like, oh yeah, that was literally just for friends. I didn't actually believe a lot of that.
Right. Yeah. And to think about that too, that's advertising. And that's marketing to
Literally,
people. Like
literally.
literally Abercrombie being like, oh, this hot skinny girl in like the woods on the side of this poster could be you if only you shopped here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like this man was advertising to these people and
Yeah.
offering community and peace and this belonging and like being the chosen one.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
he
so,
clearly did a good enough job that even
mhm,
people like your parents who are very free spirited and do whatever you want and liberal were like, oh, this seems like a good idea. This seems very
right.
inclusive. What we can try it. That's
Right.
so interesting. That's
Yeah.
wild. And are your parents still religious now? Do they?
No, I mean I don't want to say they're not religious. It's very much I think they both identify as Christian.
Yes.
Uh I know my mom does. My dad talks about it less, but I think that he's a Christian, a believer in Christ as the Son of God. Um they are never like, this is the way, the only
Right.
way, and the way I see it is the absolute truth.
They're spiritual, but not, they don't put like a label on it.
My mom
Yeah.
is very much like, I love Jesus and believe that like in Jesus as the Son of God, but if you're a Muslim, I accept you in my house. Please come over and tell me more about like what it is that you think or believe, and I
Yeah.
can identify with many parts of that as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to I always tell people that my mom is the like a real Christian, in the
Mhm.
sense that like she is very much just accepting of people,
She walks the walk.
walks the walk.
Yep.
So
Yeah, one thing I have noticed as I've been interviewing people is even people who grew up the strictest of religions,
mhm.
it seems like once their parents reach a certain age, they just like stop going to church.
Yeah.
Because like my mom is the same way, ride or die Christian, prays every single day. She does something very similar to what your mom did, except she would call it the hedge of protection. She would be like,
Uh-huh.
God, please put the hedge of protection around
Yes.
my
That's what
baby
my mom
girl.
would call it, the umbrella.
Yeah.
She would call it being under God's umbrella.
Yeah, yeah. And like, and my mom would do that, like, thank you for helping her pass her ACTs. Like, even though I hadn't taken it yet, just kind of like manifesting it.
Yeah.
But I do remember a couple years ago, I was like complaining about something, like my problems. And my mom was like, when's the last time you've been to church? And I was like, when's the last time you've been to church? And then we like just got like a screaming match. Yeah. So I think that's very interesting. But I think you're right. I think there are performative religious people. And I honestly think sometimes those are the ones that are in church every Wednesday, every Saturday, every Sunday,
Mhm.
every whatever. And then there's the true Christians who, even when people aren't looking, even when they're confronted with somebody like a Muslim person or a person of color or an LGBTQ person,
Mhm.
who they in church might get bonus points for accepting in
Right.
front of everyone, but do they do it in private as well?
Mhm.
It's very interesting to see who those people are versus the more performative ones.
Right.
Is your brother still religious? Did he take that to heart? He's like, you're like, nope.
He went to like an Episcopal. His wife is Episcopalian or Methodist or Catholic. I don't know.
One of those. One of
I
those.
feel like it's Episcopalian. or she grew up that way.
Yeah.
And I think that they went to church for a little while, and then he was like, I don't know about all this. So, but my brother was very upset. That was sort of the point of that, was like, my brother was very, very upset when the church ended. He was very much like, for the rest of his life, was like, I really believed in this thing and wanted to do the right thing. And
Yeah.
it was ripped out from under me. And now
Yeah.
I question everything and can't,
Yeah. Like
you
that
know.
would mess up your trust for
Right.
life. It's like everybody says these are the rules, but
Right.
10 years from
Especially,
now, I'm going to find out, you know?
yeah. Especially if you really believed and you were really like gung ho about
Yeah. And you
trying
sacrifice a
to.
lot, right?
For
Like even
sure.
if it's just your Saturdays, when you're a kid, that's sacrificing a lot, especially when
Sure.
everybody else is doing Friday night stuff and Saturday stuff. And that's the one time you can't. Like it
Right.
sounds
You
petty,
can't
but as a
play.
kid,
Right. Yeah. Things like you can't play football because football games are on Friday night and we don't
yeah, you
do
can't go
things
to a
on Friday
Halloween
night.
party, no matter how
Right.
popular the person is who invited you. You
You're
can't do
right.
the
You're not
Christmas
allowed.
party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever met anybody who had a different experience than you did in that church, like a more negative experience or just entirely different?
Um, this is controversial because at the time that it happened, it was made to look like an accident. There was this family that was in my church, and they were very, very, very strict on their children.
Yeah.
Also very just strange. I don't remember their names. Even if I did, I wouldn't say.
Yeah.
But it was a mother and father and a daughter and son. And it was like they wouldn't go out in the sunlight. They would wear these like giant hats and like cover their whole bodies, and they're very strict about like abiding by the rules,
Yeah.
and the energy of the whole family was that they were just like locked, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They weren't
Yeah.
like open, and it was like very not, they were like not fun. They were like the people in the church that were like kind of weird and very strict. And I remember when this happened, their son, from what I infer, committed suicide. They tried to say that there was a gun in their house, like a shotgun or a rifle, and he propped it up in the corner and it went off and shot him. But it was also, my mom told me later that wasn't what she thought happened, and it
Yeah.
wasn't what most people thought happened, but they didn't want to admit that was what happened,
Right.
because suicide is bad and wrong, and that would mean that he would have gone to the dark place, even though we didn't really talk about hell as being like fire and brimstone where you burn for eternity. It was like cast into darkness, which is just like nothingness. So that was like not fun to think about, that this incredibly strict way of being led someone to,
Yeah. Right.
but,
Right.
um,
And it makes you
yeah.
wonder if there was like anything else going on there. Like maybe he was gay, or maybe like
Right.
something else was going on that he'd been told
that
was.
he never felt comfortable
Yeah.
being himself. And
Interesting.
yeah. Aside from that, I don't really remember people having negative experiences, aside from my brother, who absolutely like hated that the church broke up.
Yeah, it sounds like the dissolution was like the biggest negative experience anybody had with it, was just the disappearance of everything they knew,
Right.
which
Right.
completely understandable.
Right, for sure.
Interesting.
And I think that, there were some things looking back, like my mom would always say that she wished that she hadn't had to miss holidays with her family for so long, because her mom died just a few years after the church dissolved and or broke up or whatever. I think that people probably felt like they missed out on time that they could have spent for like holidays and things like that
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
people who they were close with who were not a part of the church.
Right. People who
But
hadn't grown up in the church, so their family were still doing the
right.
mainstream secular things.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That would be weird to grow up like celebrating Christmas as what it is, this big thing,
Mhm.
and then just being
Yeah.
told like, no more, the end.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Like we joined this thing and now we can't come anymore to like be with you during this time where everybody's together every single year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think things like that, like it was just like time lost. I think people
Yeah.
were probably pretty upset about, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, if you could tell anybody, if you had like a message or a thought for anybody who, say, for example, grew up very religious and is kind of on the fence and they're really not sure, do they want to stay religious? Do they want to explore the, outside of their faith? What would you say to them? What advice would you give?
I think that it's similar to what I said before about radical inclusivity. I think that when you so our between the um first and seventh year of your life, for the first 7 years that you're alive, your subconscious mind is essentially a sponge. So
Yeah.
you're wide open to everyone else's thoughts and ideas about everything. So what that means essentially is that if you grow up in a home where people say this is the only way, this religion and blah blah blah, then your subconscious mind absorbs that and you have this subconscious programming, even if your conscious mind doesn't quite think. Like it took me a really long time, even though we were allowed suddenly to eat shrimp, to eat pepperoni on pizza, to eat, like it took me a really long time to be like, I don't think I ate pork until I was 17 years old and we were allowed to for
Wow.
yeah, just because I
Wow.
was like, no, why would I do that? That's unclean,
Yeah.
um but I think that one of the things to examine for anybody, not just people who grow up religiously or are taught to think one way, is to examine why you have those beliefs and where they came from, and then to really break down, like, in my heart of hearts, is this the truth? Do I really identify with this belief, or do I identify with it because someone told me for so long that it was the only way to think?
Yeah.
um and I think from that place, when you start to open up and think on your own and really become conscious of what you're thinking, even because our mind is essentially a recording on a loop. And when you can become conscious of your thoughts, then you
Mhm.
have the ability to stop your thought and to examine it and to say, do I want to continue to think this thought? Is it my own? Is it something that I truly identify with? Or can I take it and look at it and go, what if I changed this? Or what if I instead started to think about things this way? And then what actually neurologically happens is when you have, I love to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. No, I'm like absorbed just listening to what you're saying.
So when you have a thought for so long, what happens is it creates a groove, a neural pathway in your brain, essentially a groove. And the more you think that same thought, the deeper that groove gets. So in order to create new neural pathways, you have to first understand the thoughts that you already have
Right.
so that you can reframe and rethink new thoughts,
Right.
and then create a deeper groove with those new thoughts about the thing that you
Interesting.
think all the time. So of course, if you're taught and brought up to believe that one thing is the way and that's all you hear, your neural pathway is, you're going to have that deep groove. And it's not easy work to do, but I think that it's very important work
Yeah.
to examine every single thing that we think and believe and
Yeah.
ask ourselves why we think that's the truth. And then,
Absolutely. And what I like about that advice is I feel like it's applicable through all aspects of life, through politics, which I think is
Mhm,
so important. I think politics are more
mhm.
important now than ever.
Right.
But like, why do you vote the way you do? Why do you think the way you do? Why do you believe the way you do? Are you just regurgitating what everybody's saying around you? Do you need to
Mhm,
leave your fishbowl? I tell people all the time, one of the best things that ever happened to me was I was put on the debate team in college, and I
mhm,
was forced to debate. Like, not only would I go into the round getting my little topic, but I would also get what side I was on. So I would
mhm.
have to research to convince somebody that I truly believed one side, even if it was the complete opposite of what I actually believed in real life. I needed to win that round. And I
Right.
feel like that experience and being forced to expose myself to opinions that I slowly was like, oh, that's actually not what I thought that was going to be. That's kind of
Yeah.
it. Like maybe, oh, that actually sounds like I believe that more. I think that's so important. And so I think your message is very applicable, not only in religion, but I think people should apply that just kind of all over. You can never learn too much. Worst case
Sure.
scenario, you do a bunch of research and you find out you still believe what you believed when you came.
Right, exactly. You can never be overdressed or
Right,
overeducated.
right. But
So.
at least you know why,
But
right?
at
At
least you
least you
know
know why
why.
now.
Mhm.
But well,
Yep.
Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
it was so fun. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate this conversation. I really liked that you came in just kind of ready to teach, ready to tell us, as much as we love to like spill tea and, like sling dirt, I felt like you did a really great job of just being like, this is how it was. This is, what I saw. And I like your approach and I like your delivery.
Thank you.
Where can we see you? Where can we find you? Where are you at these days?
You can find me in the Edgar Allan Poe immersive theater. Actually, no, we already talked
Yes.
about that.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting. I am on Instagram as you can type in Sarah Fye, Sarah space FYE, or my Instagram name is Sapphire, which is a nod to my pole dance name, which is Sapphire. It's SAFYERI. And that's where I am on the internet the most.
Perfect.
So that's where I am.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you on the podcast. Thank you.
It was so fun. Glad we got to connect.
Yes. And I will talk to you later.
Perfect. Okay, bye.
Bye.